I want to start with the currency union. Late last year, mid last year, the heads of government in the 5 countries with these programs invited our central bank, the ECCB, to lead the effort to establish a regional regulator for Citizenship by Investment programs, CBI or CIP, as they call in some countries. Why did they ask the ECCB? They asked the ECCB because of our deep regulatory experience and expertise and our stellar track record as a regional regulator. Regulation is hard enough. Doing it regionally is even more challenging. And if you pull that off, you have something on which to leverage. And our heads acknowledge that. So, we're off and running. And this morning, I want to give you an update on where things stand and what you should expect as we proceed with this initiative. So here on screen, you see the currency union. For those of you who are from St. Kitts and Nevis, this looks pretty obvious. You know this. But I don't want to make the assumption that everyone in this room understands the currency union. So I want to start with a very basic thing, that we look after 8 countries. 5 of the 8 actually have programs. And while we may be relatively small with a population of just over 650,000, when you look at the bottom of the screen, you recognize that we are relatively large ocean states. And therein lies perhaps an untapped economic opportunity, principally, of course, in the blue economy, that extends beyond tourism, that could and at some point should include, ought to include, energy, fisheries, and even carbon sinks. So if you think about Guyana, just for a sec with the Amazon, Guyana actually has a carbon sink. So even with the oil and gas development, they are still negative in terms of their carbon footprint because of their carbon sink, the forests that Guyana has. We too have carbon sinks in these ocean areas, which are hitherto untapped and which we may want to look into. And I believe we have to look into as we think about our climate challenges, the imperative of climate resilience, and diversifying our economies around tourism, around CBI, but looking for new economic opportunities. So that slide is important and instructive. 8 countries. The ECCB, which is leading this effort, is in fact one of 4 formal monetary unions in the world. Fun fact, when the European Central Bank was being established, they came to look at what we were doing here in the Eastern Caribbean and at ECCB. The mission of our bank is simple: to advance the good of the people of the currency union. But therein lies a fundamental responsibility to touch multiple areas: monetary stability, financial stability, growth and development, among other things. So we maintain monetary stability. What does that mean? We keep the EC dollar strong. For 49 years, this currency union has kept our currency, our exchange, 1 US to 2.7 EC dollars for 49 years. And you can only achieve that with a commitment at the political level, but an excellence at the technocratic level. A combination of both, and the popular support of the people of the region. What does that translate to in ordinary terms? It means relatively low inflation, because principally we import inflation from the United States, our major trading partner. 80% of inflation you see in our currency union comes from the United States. And if you look over the last almost 50 years, we've had a relatively low inflation for extended periods. And that is a result of the arrangement we have with our currency. For investors, you would want to know that there are no foreign exchange controls. Absolutely none. You can repatriate your profits, your dividends, without any restrictions whatsoever. I can tell you without any fear of contradiction, not too far from here, in this beloved region called the Caribbean, there are many economies larger than St. Kitts and Nevis and larger than the currency union where you have to get permission to do that. You don't have to do that in our currency union. And for investors, this is a wonderful benefit that we must never take for granted, but that we want to leverage to ensure that we bring additional investors to our countries. And here, of course, in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we are gathered this morning. So when I say our countries, I'm speaking about the 8. And then, of course, I will say St. Kitts and Nevis because this is where we are, this is where we headquartered. But I always think 8, because that's my mindset as the governor of the bank. Financial stability. That's about keeping your deposits safe. And that's what we do every day. People are in the field trying to make sure that the banks are doing what they're required to do so that we keep deposits safe. And then there are strategic initiatives. So whether that's the renewable energy facility that we are pushing, whether it's the credit bureau, whether it's the partial credit guarantee, whether it's the STEM camps for young people with digital skills, all of those are simple examples of strategic initiatives that we push to help propel our region forward. And then yes, service, because we're public servants. And we aspire every day to deliver exceptional service for the people of our region. That's the ECCB. And that's why we were asked to lead this effort. What are my key messages? Before I sit, I always like to leave you with something. If you remember nothing else from the talk, you need to remember these 3 things. 1, the member governments of the 5 countries with CBI, CIP programs are fully committed, strongly committed to the sustainability of these programs. Here in St. Kitts, the focus is on being a sustainable island state. And fundamental to the future of these programs, obviously, is to ensure the sustainability by taking actions individually and collectively that give us the best chance to protect these programs. In sum, our governments are committed to ensuring that as far as is possible and as far as it depends on them, and yes, I'm challenging scripture for those of you who know your scripture, they must do everything within their power to protect these programs which have been so vital to our sustenance over these many years. And if you wondered about that commitment, the fact that they've now come together to set up a regional regulator is testament that they are serious and committed. And we understand that it is not just about what they do, the international players with which we must interface. But as far as we can control what we can control, as far as we can protect our programs, we are absolutely committed to doing that. Secondly, we have no doubt that the establishment of this regional regulator will enhance transparency, accountability, and integrity of these programs, both at home and abroad. And I stress that because sometimes the discussion is about abroad, but we must not forget the need for us to clearly address any concerns at home and to minimize the mistrust that on occasion has arisen between our member countries that offer these programs. And finally, all stakeholders, you, me, in this room, all of us in this room and outside, including our international partners, need to come together in this moment to address the threats that confront the programs, but also to seize the opportunities that present themselves. Those are my key messages. Now, I need not tell you how important these programs are for our region. If you drive around St. Kitts and Nevis and you like the roads, guess what? That's CBI. Hello? That's CBI. If you go into certain social safety nets in this country, of which there are many, counting in excess of $120 million last time I checked, that is principally CBI. So the role of this program, both for economic resilience as well as social resilience, cannot be underestimated. And of course, if you look at the wonderful tourism marketing that is going on of this country, CBI is playing a role. And you have no look no further than the end of this month when Music Festival arrives, and I can see you smiling, some of you may have to be coming back for that. That too is supported by CBI. I'm just giving you some examples. If I took this beyond this border and I went to Dominica, an international airport is being built as we speak, principally funded by CBI. And I can go down the countries one by one. Energy, hospital, infrastructure, CBI. The numbers tell the story about the proportion of GDP, that in fact is supported by this program. But for those of you who may not appreciate the GDP point, I will simply say at least 2 of our member countries rely on CBI programs for at least 50% of their revenues. That, to my mind, ladies and gentlemen, reinforces the criticality of these programs and why what we are embarked on together this week, promoting the programs, our job as a regulator to develop this regional regulator, why these initiatives are so critical. I move on. What are the objectives of this regulator? So I set the table briefly by giving you an example, what the currency union is, what ECCB does. So now we get to the specifics. What are the objectives of this regional regulator we've been asked to set up? First, it is to regulate and supervise the industry through a uniform law and common standards. What do we mean by that? We mean that there shall be one law for all 5 countries. Can that work? It sure can. We believe it can. ECCB is Exhibit A that it can. In our central bank, we have one law, the Banking Act, that applies to all 8 countries. It's a regional regulator. One law, all 8 countries. That is what we propose for the CBI regulator. But that regulator will not just have a single enabling law, it will set common standards. So whether those standards are for due diligence, whether it's for outsourcing, whether it's for marketing, whether it's for how we engage developers, there will be standards to guide, to ensure. Because what we must do here is to minimize regulatory arbitrage and at the same time, as far as is possible, minimize, if not eliminate, unfair competition among our 5 countries. The regional regulator will do that by a single law with common standards, binding on all 5 countries. And the reason why I say that is to ensure there is no regulatory arbitrage. Second, to license all market participants. And that's important. As we speak, some are under supervisory authority or supervision, others are not. If we're going to have a space, if we're going to vouch for the integrity, if we're going to ensure that locally and abroad we have confidence that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet, there has to be licensing of all market participants. And then, of course, that will be necessary but not sufficient. We must monitor compliance and enforce compliance. That will be the job of the regulator. Monitor and enforce compliance with the standards that have been set and that have been issued to all of our countries. But there's also a role for the regulator to engage stakeholders locally, regionally, and internationally with respect to these programs, the future of these programs, and any changes in the operating environment that touch and concern these programs. That is going to be an important role for the regulator. I want to be clear, this regulator will be a separate legal entity from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. So our role is to help set it up, but we will not run the regulator. The regulator will not operate from inside of the central bank. So I want to be clear, because occasionally I hear people say the ECCB will be the regulator. No, it will not be. Separate legal entity. The work on which we are embarked is overseen by an interim regulatory commission. That commission is drawn from the membership of the 5 countries with programs, and on screen you see the names of those persons. 5, 1 from each member country, plus the OECS Commission, plus CARICOM Impacts, and CARICOM Impacts plays a key role in due diligence as we speak, and the ECCB. That's the 8-member team or 8-member body that is overseeing the preparation of this legal framework. And I will say, as a team, we've gelled, we've worked really well together, we've worked hard, we put in overtime and extra time, meaning nights, weekends, to make sure that we deliver on time the assignment entrusted to us by our heads. So that's the commission that is overseeing this work. And you've met some of them as we did the consultations over the last few months. Now, where are we on this road to this regional regulator? First, having signed the agreement with the US in February 2023, our heads of government then moved to sign a memorandum of agreement. They've done that. And having done that, they then asked us to begin the work on setting up the regulator. For the last 2-3 months, we have been actively engaged in consultations across the currency union in the 5 countries that have programs to hear your voice. And I want to be very clear, we took a deliberate step. It required us to travel and to engage in an intense schedule, but we did not want to draft before we engaged you. I want to thank every one of you. Some of you we met on this journey, and I see some of them today, and it's good to see you again. You gave of your time and ideas and thoughts to help us craft this legal framework. So we did not want to just show up with a draft law without this prior consultation. We have done that. And our preparation has been enriched by what you have shared with us. On that journey, we have gone to every country. We've met all of the players, government, opposition, local agents, developers, FIUs, banks, among others. We've also met our international partners, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union. And we have benefited from those consultations. So that as we speak, we are now in a position to submit, as we have done, our draft legal framework. We met our attorneys general in early May. We had a very good discussion with them. We did a revision. We are now on our second draft, and we have now submitted our second draft to our heads, our prime ministers. There are some policy issues that we are to discuss with them. We expect that meeting to be held very soon. And once that meeting occurs, we will in fact, and I'll come back to this, we will in fact be coming to you, I hope this month, with a draft for your review. So we had a pre-draft consultations. We are now going to have post-draft consultation. And our hope is that for 3-4 weeks, you'll have the opportunity to review that draft, to send in your comments before we move to finalizing the draft for our heads. As you can see on screen, the plan is we've submitted the draft, we've done that. The plan is to share it with you this month, finalize it end of July and early August to make a final submission. That's our plan. And then our governments will have between then and the end of this year, December 2025, to enact this legislation into law. And they have to go to their parliaments to do that. So those are our next steps in terms of timing. I just want to say, so for us, our deliverables are a draft agreement and bill, which we have now submitted, a list of policy issues, which we have also submitted, and a risk assessment and protocols, which we are working on and will submit once finalized. There's some data and so on we've had to get, but we're working on that. So those are the 3 deliverables for the IRC. So we are well on track in terms of what we were asked to do and what we have done. Before I sit, I do want to say to you that it will be very important for us, having done all of this effort, given the criticality of these programs, to protect the programs that we succeed in this enterprise, in this endeavor. And we have identified several critical success factors that we believe are essential for us to succeed with this mission. And as you can see, number 1 is political support. We believe we have that support. And that has driven us as we've proceeded. The heads asked us to do this, and the heads will take this to Parliament and enact before the end of the year. Without that support, this is dead on arrival. So that is essential. Not a harmonized, but a uniform law, as I've explained, is important. If you have harmonized but not uniform, there's a risk of arbitrage, mistrust among the members and abroad. And we have sought to mitigate that by coming with a uniform law. Obviously, no regulator is worth its salt if it does not have independence. And by independence, we mean financial independence, but also independence in terms of its decision making. So that is a critical success factor. Accountability. The regulator also has to be accountable to you through a mechanism that includes the prime ministers, council of ministers, as you will see in the draft, and our parliaments. Yes, the regulator has to be accountable too, and that is provided for. Transparency. One of the things you will see is the publication of annual reports by this regulator indicating compliance by each country. Here are the standards. Country A, country B, country. Are they compliant or not? That is important to ensure transparency and to ensure that everyone knows where they stand, home and abroad. I already spoke to registration and licensing. Enforcement is critical. Any regulator worth its salt has to be able to enforce the law and the standards. Effective risk management. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the risk assessment and protocols, and the regulator will have to do that on an ongoing basis. One of the things you will see, for example, in there is, in addition to the board, we have proposed an advisory body, separate and apart from the board, that will interface with the regulator from time to time to give feedback, to give input based on developments in the operating environment. Because it's a dynamic area, and we have to be able to adapt. We have to be fairly nimble. We have to be able to respond to emerging threats and opportunities. So the advisory body is separate from the board, but there's a role for the advisory body. And we have to do it in such a way we get the feedback, but we insulate the board from regulatory capture by dominant players in the market. So we've thought about this very carefully to ensure that we are close to the market, we can hear the market, we can address issues that are rising in the market, but we are not so entrenched that the market is writing the standards. That's regulatory capture. You can't have that. You lose all credibility if you do that. Obviously, we have to continue to have stakeholder engagement throughout the process, and that is provided for. And then the cooperation. This enterprise is cross-border by definition, and in many instances deemed to be relatively high risk because of the financial integrity and other issues involved. And so international cooperation with due diligence, with how we continue to move forward and advance the program is absolutely critical. And that's why we have the constant engagement with the US, the UK, and the EU to make sure that everybody is fully alerted to where we are, and that we can share information, and that we can help support each other in terms of how we take these programs forward. And I will tell you, certainly from my time my involvement in these programs, I recall when we started, where guys would come to me at the central bank and say to me, bold, brave, and frank, Governor, we want to shut these programs down. I had those conversations. And I would ask them if they understood what they were really asking or saying. I would investigate, do you understand the criticality of the programs? Do you understand the catastrophe that would result or be visited on our region if we were to simply have a sudden stop? And I've seen the conversation evolve to cooperation, certainly with the United States. And I cannot speak for any of these partners this morning, but we remain available and attentive to engage with them, not necessarily agreeing on all points, because we won't agree on everything, but a path for effective cooperation. And there's a slide which I will leave with you, but where we actually show you what we've done in terms of the implementation of some of these agreements. It's somewhere in there, I'm not seeing it, but I had put a slide in there showing you the implementation since we, for example, signed the agreement with the United States. So let me conclude. Those are the next steps. I conclude with something I say all the time. It's an original quote of mine, but it reflects my fundamental belief about our region, our sense of history, or the reality of our geography, but also our possibilities. We cannot change our history, nor can we change our geography. We live where we live. Slavery and colonialism are realities we cannot escape. That's our history. The fact that we are some of the most climate resilient, climate vulnerable countries in the world, that is our geography. It is what it is. We cannot change that. But we can accelerate and elevate our development trajectory through innovation, which is what CBI was in 1984 when St. Kitts and Nevis pioneered this program, and others have since joined, and collective action, which is what we're doing together now as we set up this regional regulator. I believe we can and will succeed if we come together and we stay together. That is my submission. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time and attention.